to be the chairman of the Housing Finance. And my first point was to visit the governor. I told him I have a plan for it. I'm going to bring down the non-performing and somewhere in the middle, and give me at least 2 years, and we'll do it. I called the committee, the executives, I told them, I have promised the governor we are going to save this bank. And the governor has given us, on a weekly basis, a reporting schedule to show how we are going to bring non-performing book to performing level. And we assigned ourselves, there was no CEO, we were all like the Russian Politburo, and I became like executive chairman. That is the history of the revival of housing finance for near collapse, year 2002.
HFCK would return a group profit before tax of 95.3 million shillings in 2002, after several changes had been implemented in the company. One of the most significant changes was the rebranding of the company on March 6th that year. Out of the old Housing Finance Company of Kenya would come a company that was aptly named Housing Finance, a company built on the strength of the old, yet clearly focused on availing new housing solutions to homeowners and meeting the country's growing challenges. The rebranding came with a new set of financial products with an appeal in the market. These products included transactional and savings products, housing development bonds, call and fixed deposits, which aimed at encouraging Kenyans to transact, save and invest in housing finance. In addition to the deposits products, home loan products were offered to maintain HF's position as a market leader in the property business. These included owner-occupier loans, employer-sponsored loans, residential property loans, construction and plot purchase loans, as well as commercial property loans, which continued at a competitive rate of 18.5% per annum. In 2002, 2 years after Lewis Jones took over at HF, Kenyan voters ended KANU's 40-year rule when, in the general election that took place in December that year, former Vice President and Minister for Finance Mwai Kibaki, running on the ticket of the National Rainbow Coalition NARC party, beat KANU's Uhuru Kenyatta in the presidential race. One of the plans Kibaki's government announced on taking over was to create 500,000 jobs and build 100,000 housing units a year. Kibaki's economic program had the effect of generating greater competition in the economic sector. Because of this, interest rates continued to fall, and competition in the banking industry intensified, with a few commercial banks offering mortgage products that had been the preserve of two players in the market: housing finance and savings and loans. To improve its competitiveness, HF introduced a new product in August 2003 called 3-Plan Mortgage that offered greater product and pricing variety depending on a customer's ability to service the mortgage facility. 3 months later, HF would introduce an incentive dubbed Good Payer Reward for customers who had serviced their loans well for a period of 6 months. Such customers would enjoy a one-off interest rate reduction of 1%. In January 2004, HF set up its own ATM facility and issued ATM cards branded Easy Cash, enabling customers to access their funds easily and conveniently from an HF or KenSwitch branded ATM machine. HF's product offering would expand further when later in the year, HF entered into alliance with Postbank to make available Western Union money transfer services to its customers. These developments would come even as HF's subsidiary Kenya Building Society was having financial problems, largely due to the slow pace of property sales. After several years of various interventions, including the restructuring of the subsidiary company, HF's board decided to integrate Kenya Building Society into HF and have it continue to operate as a legal entity managed as a unit within HF. On July 1, 2006, Lewis Jones was replaced by Frank Ireri, who until then had been Director for Africa Operations at Barclays Bank. By the time Ireri took over, HF had turned around in terms of profitability but was still experiencing some challenges.
The first thing I did was spend time going around the whole organization, talking to all the staff, talking to customers, talking to some of the shareholders, really to get their views. I already had my own impressions, but I really wanted to get the views. I think one of the strengths that stood out then, and I guess still stands out, is that the company was still well renowned for mortgages, as one of the top, if not the top, mortgage provider in the market. But I must say the company also had a lot of challenges. And some of the key challenges I found, one was the issue around non-performing loans. We had a huge, about over 70% of our loan book was non-performing. As a result of that, we then had capital constraints because we're having to eat into our capital to provide for these non-performing loans. The other challenge I found was a culture issue. It was almost a parastatal sort of culture. People are not aggressive, people are not hungry to sell. We were not serving our customers to the best of our abilities. And the third, and the other challenge was a poor brand image.
One of Ireri's key assignments at HF was to formulate a 5-year turnaround strategic plan, which was approved by the board in February 2007. It was under this plan that in April 2007, HF came up with a new product dubbed First Hop, which targeted first-time homeowners, leveraging on the Home Ownership Savings Plan, which had been made effective in January 2007, in accordance with the Income Tax Act announced by the Finance Minister David Muraria. Under the plan, a depositor was eligible for a tax rebate for deductions of up to a maximum of 4,000 shillings per month in respect of funds deposited in the plan. Further, interest earned on the deposit not exceeding 3 million shillings was exempt from withholding tax. The First Hop account would earn HF the Best Product Innovation Award at the 2008 Banking Survey Awards. In July of the same year, Property Point was launched by Housing Minister Soita Shitanda, following the successful business the Property Mart had done previously. Property Point became a one-stop shop for property developers, estate agents, suppliers of housing and construction materials, and property buyers to acquire property and property-related items. A few months after the Property Point's inauguration, HF launched the Macau product, which targeted plot owners interested in constructing their own homes through a consortium of building professionals to oversee the construction of their homes. This product was designed to make the construction process free of hassles and would later be recognized as the best product innovation at the 2009 Banking Survey Awards. 2007 was also the year during which CDC, the single largest shareholder in HF with 24.9% of the shareholding at the time, sold its interest in HF to Equity Bank and British American Investment Company, also known as Britam, since 2012. After the sale, HF's shareholding would stand at 7.32%, the Government of Kenya, 20% Equity Bank Limited, 4.9% British American Investment Company, 7.87% National Social Security Fund (NSSF), and the rest, 59.91%, to the public.
In 2006, we got invited by the management of Housing Finance to consider investing in housing finance because the strategic investor, who was Commonwealth Development Corporation, wanted to exit, and they needed an investor who could then help HF to continue growing. HF was in a very difficult financial situation, so they thought at that time an investor with deep pockets. So they invited us with Equity Bank. And you probably know that Britam is also an investor in Equity Bank. And that's how then they said, you are two entities who seem to have deep pockets. Can you actually consider this investment? And it was 24.45%. So we got in, we saw potential of riding on the back of housing finance to sell insurance.
But 2007 was the year Kenyans went to the polls in a controversial general election in December. In the presidential race, it was Kibaki, seeking a second term on the ticket of the Party of National Unity, PNU, against his main challenger, Raila Odinga, of the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM party. At the end of the vote counting, Kibaki was declared the winner, but Raila Odinga and his ODM supporters disputed the results. Violence would later erupt because of the dispute. More than 1,000 Kenyans would lose their lives, and more than 500,000 would be rendered homeless. The post-election violence necessitated the intervention of the international community. By April 2008, a grand coalition government had been set up after peace negotiations chaired by former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan had been concluded. In the coalition government, Kibaki remained president and Raila Odinga became prime minister. The 2007-2008 post-election violence presented significant challenges across all sectors of the economy. Transport was affected by the violence as well as by the rise in fuel prices. Inflation went up, and resources for purchase or building of new houses were scarce. And yet, despite all this, HF was able to increase its pre-tax profit by 79%, from 113 million to 203 million shillings. Indeed, in mid-2008, HF concluded a rights issue to inject new capital and increase its shareholder equity to 3.65 billion shillings. The rights issue, which was oversubscribed by 3%, enabled HF to raise 2.3 billion shillings through the sale of an additional 115 million shares, which resulted in a change in the company's shareholding position. Now, 3.7% was owned by the Government of Kenya, 24.9% by Equity Bank Limited, 7.5% by British American Investment Company Limited, 6.83% by NSSF, and 57.07% by the public. The significance of this was that HF could now lend up to 700 million shillings to a single borrower, where previously the limit was 180 million. The extra capital also enabled HF to enter into an agreement with the Ministry of Housing to provide mortgages at subsidized rates to civil servants, in what was known as the Civil Servants Mortgage Scheme. The scheme opened the door for thousands of civil servants across the country to access mortgages. It was in the same year that HF adopted a new vision and mission in a bid to entrench itself in the real estate industry. The HF vision was to be the leading provider of integrated solutions of the acquisition, development and improvement of property in Kenya. HF's new mission was to be the leading integrated solutions enabler for the property industry. To live up to the new vision and mission, HF in 2009 continued to introduce more innovative products. They included what was called Home Freedom, that was developed in partnership with British American Investment Company, a key shareholder of HF. The new product was introduced following the government's initiative to allow the assignment of up to 60% of accrued retirement benefits to acquire a home. Home Freedom enabled HF to offer up to 115% of the value of the property and to cover costs such as stamp duty, as well as legal and valuation costs. To fund its capital-intensive business growth, HF would in 2010 raise 7 billion shillings as the first tranche of a 10 billion shilling offer from the bonds market. The bond was oversubscribed by 41% of the original target of 5 billion. For this achievement, HF received the Bond of the Year award, Perhaps the most important development for HF in 2010 was the announcement in the budget speech by Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Uhuru Kenyatta, that mortgage finance institutions would be allowed to offer current accounts to their customers. By March 2012, after much lobbying, HF had launched its current account and could now issue checkbooks to its customers like any commercial bank. The significance of this was that the current account helped HF mobilize inexpensive deposits from its customers, enabling it to compete effectively in the market. In 2010, the country had adopted a new constitution after Kenyans had voted in a national referendum. President Kibaki, his cabinet that included Raila Odinga as Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance Uhuru Kenyatta, and members of Parliament had been sworn in again under the new constitution on August 27th that year, at a